Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Jordan Carter, and I'm curator and co-head of the curatorial department here at Dia Art Foundation. And first, I want to thank Liv Kinaberti, Kim Golding, and Dan Wolf, for their collaboration producing today's program. I'm thrilled to introduce Max Hooper Schneider, who will be discussing the work of Lucas Samaras and Meg Webster, both on long-term view here at Dia Beacon. Max has prepared an incredibly rich and prismatic presentation for us today, reflecting on the intersections of their practices as well as their combined influence on his own. In many ways, this talk has been germinating since I first encountered Max's work, a caged neon-contaminated habitat in dialogue with the eccentric haptic boxes of Lucas Samaras in the 2021 exhibition titled Technologies of the Self at Mark Selwyn Gallery in Los Angeles. The following year, the two kindred spirits were reunited here in New York, with Max presenting a skull-encrusted uranium shrine alongside an array of Samaras' unruly assemblage in the group exhibition Wild Strawberries at 125 Newbury. Given Max's background in landscape architecture and interdisciplinary practice cross-pollinating art, nature, and technology, it seems a natural progression that he decided to triangulate the dialogue here with Meg Webster in her presentation of signature concave and convex earthworks on view behind us, or in front of you, rather. Max's polymathic practice casts into clearer focus the ways all three artists cultivate a tension between radical personal and environmental ecologies and their containers on both micro and macro scales, exposing the porous boundaries between interior and exterior, body and landscape, and imagining alternative ways of living, both within and alongside humanity. And with that, please join me in welcoming Max Hooper Schneider.
Hello, how are you guys? That was good. So I think I over-prepared, and I kind of ended up making a dissertation that has 12 to 9 episodes within it. So we can, I think the way we're going to do this, well, actually, I programmed an intermission, but then I heard that they don't do intermissions. So I think I've got a way to lighten the mood at certain moments, and also, because now this is kind of like an athletic endeavor, we're just going to see as far as we can go, you know? As far as we can go comfortably. And I want to pass this around. I'll explain it later. Everyone should just hold it, rattle it. We'll explain it. I'll explain it towards the end if I remember. So I want to begin by thanking Jordan, Matilda, Liv, and Kim, and everyone else at Dia for placing trust in my musings, hopefully not ill-founded, and for the invitation to speak today. I thank as well Meg Webster, Arnie Glimcher, and Oliver Schultz, and my curator friends for their gracious insights, offbeat anecdotes, and ongoing friendship. I also thank Paula Cooper Gallery and Pace for heeding my image requests. And finally, I thank all of you who've come today in this afternoon to participate in an event whose induced effects feel more like those of a pinball machine or a Paleozoic safari as opposed to a sleep aid. As you could imagine, the invitation to speak on the work of Lucas Samaras and Meg Webster and to reflect on the intersections between their practices and my own work has provided me with the opportunity to think freshly about Samaras and Webster and about my own practice in relation to theirs. Something I admit I had never considered until about 10 or 12 years ago when the Los Angeles dealer Mark Selwyn purchased a drawing of mine and insisted that Samaras was my ancestral soulmate. Let's go to the drawing. All right, so he got this drawing and he said, I walked into Max's studio, picked up the drawing and looked at Max and said, you and Samaras were separated at birth. I instantly recalled Samaras' mosaic paintings and fabric reconstructions and saw the same vibrating, cellular, interlocking psychedelic forms and colors in the drawing. There was a distinct horror vacuum. And regarding Meg, this consideration deepened in 2017 when Meg and I met at a smorgasbord breakfast buffet while we were both installing at the Aarhus Garden Triennial in Aarhus, Denmark. And I recently had a conversation with Meg, so she wanted me to get her more angsty quote in first. So she says, "When I make gardens, I am not thinking about a heterotopia and how a garden could illustrate this concept. However, I do intend for them to get wilder, evolve into the unknown, exceed what has been planned for or what is appropriate. The garden, to my mind, exists as an anti-Trump model, an ecosystem for countering dictatorial spaces." So, to be frank, this is what I was installing in Denmark. This is essentially a pyramidal lava lamp filled with garbage. Possibly sovereign garbage, much like a seed bank or something like that. And the other thing you guys are gonna have to do is remind me to sometimes speak about the works, but we'll get into this. So this is a challenging assignment. While there were ready-made, quickly recognized similarities and differences between our practices, the most obvious being the shared use of containers, containment strategies, and non-synchronous material juxtapositions, it was a much more daunting task to identify more clandestine, obscure intersections and to create a nexus that would make it possible to compare the works of such seminal figures as Webster and Samaras, whose careers began in New York City and evolved there, and my own, forged in Los Angeles several generations and movements later. Another issue was the monstrous volume of material. To talk about one artist in an hour is challenging, but to talk about three and present a comparison of their work is extremely challenging. I made several false starts, failed disciplinary taxa and bogus strategies, despaired, and began again several times over. I also wanted to make sure I engineered something that doesn't seem too self-impressed, basically, or overly didactic. And I put together this talk in the way I put together an artwork. I let the materials reign. The result is a voluptuary of montaged images and videos of works that hopefully have not been corrupted by my sesquipedalian verbiage. So today there's no lessons, no messages, nothing comprehensive, nothing definitive, no grand conclusions, only instances in operation, stars in a constellation, or fluorescing sea slugs in a tide pool. And I'm going to quickly speak about, the central tenet of my practice, which is more like a treatise, and it's about something I call the trans habitat. And I'm going to show you I'm going to have this video playing, which I think illustrates the concept best. And if you're curious, it's powdered mercury being combusted, and it kind of nails my idea of entropy, which is supposed to be understood not as a irrecoverable loss of matter, but actually a profusion. So, my thesis on the trans habitat. And this is also actually at a very, very small scale, and it has to be done under multiple fume hoods because it's produces Zyklon, which is obviously extremely lethal. My practice boils down to a single concept, that is the trans habitat. I begin with the trans habitat because it introduces my own practice and, as important, frames what I find most compelling in identifying intersections between the works of Samaras, Webster, and myself. It has a third function here. It establishes a working definition of nature which, as it turns out, constitutes a major intersectional nexus between us. The importance of nature is obvious with Webster, not all the time with me, and not all with Samaras until you start thinking about his flesh and body works. The trans habitat, an idea developed early in my practice, is anchored in a view of nature that is monist and materialist. As such, it provides a strong counter to what since the 17th century has dominated Western constructs of nature, a belief system whose foundational tenets are a Newtonian conceptualization of the universe as mechanistic and a Cartesian mind-matter dualism that divides nature into two radically different orders of being. This is very important. Mind, the thinking thing, that gives humans the ability to transcend and master nature, and extended matter, which constitutes everything else, including, notably, the human body. As opposite of mind, matter is constructed as base, passive, incapable of thinking and willing, doomed to mindlessly repeat nature's mechanistic laws, its sole purpose being to provide the raw materials for humans to cook with. This reified logic sources and maintains a hierarchical regime of classificatory systems and related, equally nefarious dualisms. Another very important point. Culture, nature, form, content, subject, object, living, dead, organic, inorganic, and an ideology and worldview that grants humans, by virtue of their ability to reason, an exceptional place within the universe, enabling them to exploit and rule over it. It's obviously what we all are working against here. This ideology, conceived as the heroic conquering of nature, plays a significant role in what Adorno refers to as the violent hubris of Western thought, functioning to legitimate centuries of domination and destruction of a planet and of people and places constructed as nature due to their inability to transcend the brute material existences in which they remain mired. So my transhabitat, as a practice, rejects this Newtonian Cartesian ontology. It is grounded instead in theorizations of nature that constitute an overthrow of the old regime. The most influential of these are Spinoza's monist materialism, the materialist vitalism of Bergson and Deleuze, Ernst Bloch's speculative materialism, and a number of biological and ecological concepts such as autopoiesis, holobiontic mutualism, interdependence, and succession. Together, these works liberate matter in its hegemonic formulations. Matter gains vitality and competence. It has the agential capacity to produce effects and alter the course of events, and far from being the submissive substance fantasized by humans, can act back, thwarting their feeble intentions. At the same time, humans are ousted from their exalted position to become one mode of nature naturing among others. Their celebrated reasoning powers demoted to the same democratic plane as the whisperings of bacteria, the calculations of extremophiles and moss piglets, the signifying activities of honeybees, and the utopic glow of trashy jewelry, and the shiny curios we find at the Goodwill. It is as a switch has been thrown and everything bursts into life. As a result, nature in its reified hegemonic formulations becomes radically novel. Although volumes have been written on this transformation, I will restrict myself to two generalizations. All matter acts. All matters as modes of nature naturing are participants in an imminent autopoietic process of mutual morphogenesis in which they are perpetually generated and regenerated, formed and deformed, mutated and transmutated. Nothing ends, nothing dies. In this ontology of the unfinished, there is kinesthesis and dynamism, but no death, no stasis ever. Another important point. No body, no thing, including human things, is isolate or autonomous. Nature is inherently symbiotic, interdependent, and synergistic. All bodies are formed and exist only through their transformative interactions with other bodies as exchanges of matter, energy, and information. So, in sum, the work of the transhabitat, like nature reconceived, is revolution, defamiliarization. It is an event, conceptual and material, for making strange the ways in which humans have understood the world out there and the fairy tales they have told about their place in that world, including stories told as art. Okay, that's the bit on my practice. We can get into what I'm calling the tour of operations here, and there are 9. So like I said, we'll see how far we want to go. The tour consists of 9 destinations, each of which presents an operation that is suggestive of intersections between the works of Webster, Samaras, and myself. The operations are transhabitats in action. They are not iterations of art history's typical classificatory schemes, the ideological and formal orthodoxies that position works according to style, theme, motif, and location in time and place. They are instead precisely operational, existing only as performed for the duration of this talk. It has been said about Webster and myself, and even more so about Samaras, that our works are difficult to classify. Here, I make no attempt to do so. As a structuring strategy, categories are enticing, exerting a vulgar allure. But they obscure as much as they illuminate and, in any case, as an order imposed on turbulent realities, are doomed to fail. The operations in line with the rejection of reified stabilities are both promiscuous and porous, and as will become apparent, keywords in this operational lexicon, entropy, box, heterotopia, form and formless, aleatory, appear multiple times in reference to multiple works. This is as it should be. The intersections I have selected for this talk have been chosen for a specific reason. They deploy defamiliarizing strategies that de-reify and destabilize both ontological and art historical certainties. Also, okay, so between the academic bits, I'm going to read chapters from the first story I ever wrote when I was 5, and I dictated it to my mom, and she transcribed it on a typewriter, and it's called Blood of the Death. And I think this will just help us. We can do some intellectual off-gassing here. Chapter 1. Michael went out behind his garage one night. It was a full moon. He put his hand on the garage door and whap, a cold hand came out on top of his. He looked. It was a mummy. The mummy punched him in the nose, and his nose was bleeding, and guts and worms were coming out of the blood. Michael looked around, trying to get his breath, and there was a vampire. The vampire threw his tooth in his neck, and then he turned into an ugly, bloody skeleton. All right. Let's get into this tour, okay? Okay. This first section is called Transformation, Aesthetics of Succession and Profusion. The works presented here are in a sense paradigmatic for each artist and serve an introductory purpose as well as materializing the aesthetics of succession and profusion as the first intersection of the tour. And that's why I wanted to show that video prior. That's my idea of entropy. It's growing. It's a bounty. It's, ever shape-shifting, but no loss. The three works demonstrate signature compositional and aesthetic strategies that have recurred over time and in a variety of media. First and most important, there is a shared commitment to matter in all of its transformative operations. As such, there is an interplay between breakdown and regeneration, accumulation and expenditure, form and formless, coming into being and passing away. The insistent materialism means the materials used have a strong presence as colors, shapes, and sensory transmissions. It also means, in accord with the assertion that all matter acts, that there is an emphasis on contingency and process, the advancement of immanence over transcendence, the employment of a heterogeneity of materials, compositional strategies, and methods, the rejection of an aesthetics of autonomy, and the notion of fixed signs, stable meanings, and identities. Gone too is the division between high and low art. Finally, there is a commitment to the defamiliarizing work of astronomy. And on this one, I mixed it up with the comparisons. We'll start with Samaras on this one. And this is the work, his first box from 1962. Donald Judd describes Samaras' art as messy and improbable. It can hardly be summed up without resorting to mere concatenations of mostly oxymoronic descriptions. Abrasive, seductive, satirical, impassioned, teasing, bombastic, visceral, conceptual, surreal, spectral, maybe. And yeah, he made nearly 300 of these, and this is the first one. To me, this box looks like a junkyard bivalve or an overstuffed, bodiless, metal-quilled mouth choking on household flotsam, or even a bear trap wearing chainmail armor being electrocuted. It is beautifully filthy and erratic in form, and it remains to me one of the mascots of his practice, demonstrative of estrangement and enchantment of everyday artifacts, explosive profusion and porous assemblages, and something organismal with a violent allure. I recently also interviewed Arnie Glimcher, his friend of 57 years, I think, and he said, Samaras was gifted at turning the mundane into treasure. He could turn commonplace forms into something more stimulating, more bizarre, or magical. His works are like the most beautiful reef fish that one is afraid to touch because it might be toxic. Samaras says, my transformations are propaganda for my psyche. I like this, that, and the other. Not that I don't like wallowing in technique or have contempt for narcotic pleasures, but mine must somehow puncture all aspects of visual creation. Let's see here. So for Webster, I chose pool. And I know this work intimately because I was installing a Pierre Wieg tank at PS1 for a week and spent a long time with this work. And it functions as a total succession. So in terms of this transformation and profusion idea, it's a total succession. It's a flood. It also functions as a sonic succession. The thunderous waterfall echoed throughout nearly every room in the museum. It creates an umwelt for koi fish and lily pads and speculates on ecologies of neglect and the reclamation of hardscapes and the built environment. The work performs a ubiquitous worldwide event. When water forms pools, ponds, reservoirs, oxbows, etc., in abandoned or fragmented urban environments, aquatic flora and fauna and water bugs perform a rapid volunteerism. Poole performs many of the operations that have become characteristic of Webster's work. The juxtaposition of human and non-human nature, the use of combination of natural ready-mades and industrial products. It is anti-monumental, and it makes use of the container, in this case, a museum room, to focus attention on a recurrent tension in her works, many currently on view here today. This is a tactical attempt to contain a material to review its true tamelessness, its precarity and volatility. This, in effect, is an allegory for humankind's will to mastery and is expressive of her commitment to halting planetary destruction that has been part of her work from the very beginning. Webster says, I'm now 80. The desire to keep going comes from my desire to care for the planet, its creatures, for ecological balance, my love for materials of the earth, the plants, and to understand systems of inhabitation in order to further these ecological systems. And I think on a personal level here, for me, the power of these works is their lack of fixity. They are eco-poetic essays on the never-ending transformations of matter. It is easy to see this dynamism in Poole as the movement of water, but in other works, this is executed through their stillness. The minuscule beaded condensations of oil on the surface of curved beeswax, the non-vascular desiccation of moss piles and the concurrent formation of spores, the hyaline mineralizations that perennially patina the surface of copper or steel, the barely visible cascades of dust falling on conical mounds, or the volunteerism of various microfauna inside the steroid ikebana or stick spiral. And for myself, I chose this work. It's great to have so many friends here today, seriously. It makes this much more casual. This is a work that was kind of like my Gesamtkunst work from 2019 at the Hammer Museum right before the pandemic, called Transfer Station, which essentially is a fancy term for dump site. The Transfer Station is a work I exhibit at the Hammer Museum. I said that. The materials I use are a heterotopic mixture of those considered natural: seaweed, coyote fur, shells, uranium glass, fossils, dried cacti, sunflowers, and the majority mass-produced ready-mades, both in their original state, jelly beans, aluminum cans, plastic jewels, Band-Aids, rubber aquarium decor, shopping carts, mannequins, and in their ruined states as trash or garbage. both terms signifying the discarded excesses of consumer culture. All of the materials in here, from my perspective at least, are alluring, charismatic, erratic, and possibly erotic. They connote immanence rather than transcendence, base materialism rather than the ideal, profanity rather than the sacred. Here, secondhand bric-a-brac is seen as something miraculous. I'm going to skip my bit on the process for this. Actually, forget it. I want to talk about the process here. Once the materials have been accumulated, they are subjected to an onslaught of transformative operations. This is a strategic act of defamiliarization for me. And I think you can probably see this in Samaras too. I mean, I'm sure you can. A ready-made form, like a ready-made idea, is prescriptive. It makes me claustrophobic. It inhibits thought, prevents intellectual and material wandering. That's to quote Mike Kelly. And incites perceptions to run along established tracks, bringing conceptual and material imagining to an abrupt halt. A ready-made, for me, is analogous to a love story with a linear plot. Ready-mades subjected to the technique of succession and profusion counter this fixedness through encrusting, fragmenting, melting, lacerating, countless layerings, entombment, invagination, camouflage, and psychasthenia, and the massing together of swarms of incongruent materials. Ready-mades regain their innate potential for pluralistic mutation. The transfer station exhibits these characteristics of the heterotopia and the heterochrome, visible as the recombination of materials originating in different times and places in the same space and the same now. There is an absence of recognizable categorical and hierarchical distinctions, and no immediately discernible borders between organic and inorganic, formed and formless, natural and artifactual, creation and destruction. Benjamin's ruin meanings, as the products of decay, present a jungle of material that is no longer smoothly arranged. There is no orienting gestalt, no disciplinary cone of vision, no governing order. All right. You can see that's a giant Oreo cookie at the bottom from that movie, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I don't know if you want a little fact. Do you remember that movie? But there are a lot of, I live in Southern California, I live in Los Angeles, and I have access to these strange movie props that just come up on Craigslist, and it's usually some bachelor or bachelorette getting rid of their cave of curios, and I buy them and I distress them and I succeed them and I put them into these habitats. It's kind of my Sunday activity. This is again a giant Raggedy Ann doll from that movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Shopping cart. Operation 2. What are we at? 40 minutes? Okay, doesn't matter. If I don't get, well, we can publish the rest, you know? I'm just happy to be here. This is a favorite one of mine, and I call it aleatory structures. When I use the word aleatory with regard to artistic procedure, I intend it to mean something gestural, a kind of high-risk gambling with shape and form. How something randomly falls, balances itself, or reacts when cast, dumped, broken, or flayed. I see these aleatory structures recurring in the work of both Webster and Samaras, and surely myself. I have always been enamored by the autopoietic arrangements of dump sites with their regenerative possibilities, nest-like massings of dead branches, abandoned construction sites colonized by stray plants and animals, and unidentifiable mists and effluents. Whatever the material or scale, and I'm sure you've all noticed this in some way, whatever the material or scale, the interlocking assemblages and taut bindings always seem to find the path of least resistance for the formation of a structure and always seem to balance themselves, come together in a way that defies gravity. They are associated with the wastes and failures of our built environment and can be found everywhere on this planet. I'm going to start with Webster. So this is Running from 1990, and it's one of my top 5 favorite Webster works. The broken vista of the entire installation looks like a Home Depot that was placed inside a giant Cuisinart and then abandoned only to become bioactive again. a thriving, as I term it, ecology of neglect. And in many ways, it is exactly that. It is neither construction site nor fountain, but something more liminal. A balancing act of commonplace building materials and PVC pipes that evolved into an aquatic system inside a tarp-lined pit. The material condensation gives us no conclusions as to whether the elements were vomited out of a dump truck or is their precarious conformation the product of innumerable artist tinkerings. Many people regard Webster as an earth artist. I do as well, but my image of earth is neither pastoral nor paradisical. It is populated by landfills, brownfields, old mines, 7-Elevens, Superfund sites, the bathrooms at a Claire's ear-piercing salon, and pavement-incubated dandelions. In this way, running seems universal, something that is present on every continent, in every town and city, in every rural community. Now, Samaras' aleatory structures. The chair transformations, particularly the wire hanger chairs and the household assemblage of the 80s, are more wildly unkempt, loosely spewing boxes have a similar aleatory language, but as opposed to running, seem to evolve their precarious structures successively out of each last step. They are haphazardly syllogistic. This wire bent this way, or this fish or piece of rope falls this way and thus informs the next accretional gesture of branching, twisting, billowing, etc. Tiny towers of rubbish inside trash cans, piles of hair on the barbershop floor, or a rat in a trap have similar architectures. Eventually, the wire chairs, informed by their own unique structural logic, become stable enough to function as substrates or nets for other forms of bycatch and byproduct, plastic mementos, household tools, elements of older works. Yarn, plastic, champagne glasses, and other upcycled drag artifacts from the artist's studio. They have the language of a recycling center or a befouled fishing net from a tropical resort. The materials arrange themselves, form symmetries based on seasonal volumes and environmental orbits of waste. I'm calling the boxes in this series the wiggly boxes. So the wiggly boxes, as I'm calling them, are also exemplary of aleatory structuring. Samaras' use of hair, yarn, rope, and other wiggly media operate in the same manner. Boxes 98, 27, and 3, among others seen here, are paradigmatic. Hair dangles, tangles, and spills outward. Yarn and fray rope lay in unfixed states like eviscerated entrails, but also forces the exhibitor to preen and arrange with each display cycle. The participation of the non-artist, or wind for that matter, furthers the movement of the works. And on a minute scale, they will never sit the same way, never present the same mess twice. It is this disorder of arrangement, these little material riots, that Samaras was so successful in orchestrating. The boxes, they also kind of remind me of an advent calendar vomiting Mexican jumping beans. So with regard to my stuff in this section, well, let's look at these. You can see, I think that's box number 3, the yarn. I'm showing works from my Climax community series, and if a Climax community in ecology, which I've used, as an artistic procedure now, but the real definition, or the original definition, is the ecological assemblage in an environment right before its collapse. So these were essentially landfills and dump sites subjected to a maritime flood. So you got bullet casings in a boot with sea urchins. This one's fishing marginalia and decorator crabs. Plastic plants, a hair dryer, strange things from gift shops in Chinatown. And it had these fluorescent, I forget the neon tetras in it. Plastic chains that became a nursery for seahorses that actually reproduced in the system. shattered chandeliers from the Maldives, from a resort in the Maldives, and it was a habitat for ghost crayfish. Operation 3. This is what I call photo-excitations and molecular amplifications. Photo-excitation is the phenomenon endemic to and recurring throughout my practice, which I have chosen to adapt as one of the general nexuses between all three artists, and more generally, I intend to highlight as an artistic operation. Quite literally, photo-excitation is an increase in the energy level of an atom or molecule after it absorbs light in the form of a photon. Simply stated, a photon is a cup of coffee for an atom. There are many means of achieving this phenomenon via a work of art that go beyond the scruples of the hard sciences and which make photo-excitation more interesting as both procedure and metaphor. Whether in the form of light or radio wave or something more architectonically or ecologically anomalous, molecules are accelerated, multiplicity is produced, energy is added to an encounter. Increasing surface area and multiplying space can be done mechanically, fracturing, splicing, weaving, chewing, smashing, cutting, folding, or optically, with light reflection, refraction, magnification, mirroring, gaseous entrapment, electromagnetism, and so forth. The intervention is not always additive. Sometimes a simple fold, and you definitely see this a lot with both Samaras and Webster, rotation or removal of a single piece or part of a wall will induce the maximal amplified field, the flood of photons, the energized encounter. We can learn from our own digestive system and the involutions of a human intestine. The greater the surface area, the greater the enzymatic activity, which equals a happier, more excited gut. This is on view here. Doorway. Michel Foucault, I wanted to quote him for a second on mirrors. The mirror exists between utopias and heterotopias as sort of a mixed joint experience. The mirror functions as a heterotopia, and he coined the phrase heterotopia. It makes every place I occupy when I look in mirror at once absolutely real and connected with all the space that surrounds it, and absolutely unreal, since in order to be perceived, it has to pass through a virtual point that is over there. The idea for Doorway came to Samaras as he was writing a short story called Kill Man. The title character lived in a mirrored house surrounded by endless reflections and repetitions of himself. As Samaras described it, on one wall was a box, which upon opening revealed jewel parts of a man, mirror inside, a mirror outside the box, and an X-ray machine. Doorway, which can be entered, mimics Killman's environmental distortions through the multiplication of images that, as with photo-excitations and molecular amplifications, ruptures and complicates space and otherwise idealized structures. In this case, thresholds and mirrors. Using the reflective surfaces of mirrored panels, Samaras creates a fragmented, seemingly infinite field that in effect becomes an optical absorption of its surroundings, including its guests. So in sum, doorway leads to more doorways. I'll breeze through these, but I like them because I'm not sure it's everyone's favorite, but because they've kind of been marginalized. They're the XYZ series from Samaras. And to my mind, photo manipulation and collage illuminated by a computer screen is also suggestive of photo-excitation. We see the same mirroring techniques and infinite redoubling of space as we do in Doorway, albeit on a different plane. I think when Adobe Photoshop first came out, Samaras was fascinated, particularly because there was an instant and immediate transformation that could happen. But they also, I think he liked taking risks, and these definitely risk an aesthetic of being the kind of LSD art we find on Haight-Ashbury or the Venice Boardwalk. And I think later we're turned into NFTs, right? Yeah. So, I bet we could have guessed solar grow room would be my selection for photo-excitation for Webster, which was first created in 2016 at Villa Panza. It is an engineered ecosystem in which raised planters planted with moss, grass, flowers, and other vegetation are sustained by solar panels. It is an ongoing experiment in phototropism, meaning how plants grow and orient themselves towards light, with which photosynthesis, as the photoexcitation of energy production, is a constituent force of plant architecture. It also functions as a psychedelic distortion, much like Doorway, a funhouse of purple and magenta UV grow lights and shape-shifting walls of hanging, rippling mylar across which swirling lights play like the aurora borealis. It is both vertiginous vortex, indoor garden, and adumbration, a survivalist hothouse that will become more common as the hostile conditions of a dying planet amplify. Another, maybe less obvious example is copper discs sometimes warmed by the sun. And metal is malleable, and copper is particularly soft. So as this copper disc is excited and heated by the sun, its body contracts and expands on a scale not detectable to the human eye. It's essentially a living substrate for photons, and I think this is paradigmatic of matter lacking fixity in her practice, because it appears hard. All right, let's see. Chapter 2, though, of my childhood story. Let's take a break. One day, Michael was walking around and he saw something really gross. I forgot these. Sorry. I forgot my photo-excitations. We'll go to my photo-excitations in a second. One day, Michael was walking around and he saw something really gross. There was a meat-eating plant eating a human body with sharp teeth, and the human was screaming and then turned into a scary monster and threw up bloody bones and human heads. Let me show you two of my photo-excitations. This is an engineered ecology, and I have a whole section on engineered ecologies towards the end, which we will not get to. But these are called black knife ghostfish. As part of their sonar, they release little electrical discharges into the water, and collectively, all of those discharges were harvested to power this neon sign that says "Jesus saves" that I found. So it was flashing on and on the whole time. And in case you're curious, because I would be, they all survived. They all doubled in size by the end of the exhibit, and they all went back to the aquarium place that I got them. I don't really use like charismatic animals anymore in my work, because I think I made that point. But I'm a master aquarist, so they're all treated really well. This is a more recent photo excitation. And you also have probably gathered that all of these could operate within all of the interoperations I'm introducing here today. So this is essentially a giant chandelier of helicopter wreckage, and at the bottom there's a tide pool filled with mineral oil and miniature Tesla coils that go off randomly, and when they let out their resonant discharge, they make the lights flash on and on without being plugged in. So let's skip this, but it was kind of noisy. This happened throughout the show. And I doubt the gallery ever wants to allow me to do a show ever again. All right. Cool. This is a good one. If we can get through 3 more, we'll be good. Operation 4 is speculative Umwelt and species dysphoria. So the works presented here are imagined renditions of the ultimately unknowable Umwelten of non-human objects, flora, fauna, noble gases, islands, etc. As frame-contained habitats and live ecosystems, they are engineered as invitations to non-human biota and objects, metaphoric watering holes that invite obese Raggedy Ann dolls, Kawasaki's Corleo horse, and popcorn snails to drink. Jakob von Wechsel developed the concept of the Umwelt, who defines it as an immanent species-specific perceptual apparatus that determines a species' reality. Umwelten are attuned to what is necessary, what is useful. The worlds they create are highly selective and narrowly focused, rejective of all extraneia that serve no survival purpose. What is taken as the world is a section, a slice, an instance of the totality, but there is no recognition that something is missing. Umwelten are the world. I have an idea. Let's just do them. Webster's, I think this is probably her zenith, or most literal Umwelt, is concave room for bees, and this is where we met and became friends. Originally 2016, but it was installed in Denmark in 2017. It's essentially an arena for pollination and the coevolution of plants and insects, which, fun fact, I know I shouldn't digress, but plants and insects do co-evolve together in the sense that plants will evolve a skin, and then an insect will evolve a sharper piercing device to pierce the skin, and then it goes on forever. Nature is the work's material. Bees and flowers are co-creators with Webster. Strata of soil are revealed here, and earth is groomed into an encompassing pathway that surrounds the expanse, potentializing human participation in a democratic plane of mutualistic symbioses, as well as provoking them to imagine the Umwelten of flower worlds, eusocial bee colonies, and the native jungles of greenery that are homes for other beings. The human is one participant among many, demoted from the usual position of centrality. And I told you I recently had interviewed Meg, and we were talking about Umwelts, and she says, humans possess Umwelts. She kind of rejected my my surmise on Umwelts. So she says, humans possess Umwelts, and I produce my works so the human body can connect to and blend with nature and its biodiversity of forms. However, I do think about speciesism and the cultural aversion towards insects specifically. Why wouldn't someone want to live in close proximity to honeybees or butterflies? There needs to be more pushback regarding cohabitating with insects. I'm going to show you, this is a sonic, oh Jesus. This is a Meg Webster sound piece called Nearest Virgin Forest. That's another kind of immersive Umwelt. I don't know if I can turn it off. It'll go off. So now we'll do Samaras Umwelts. As the photo transformation in other works suggests, Samaras experiments most often with his own profusion of selves and their speculative Umwelten. This is definitely the case with Conflict 23, where he gestures towards his own species dysphoria, a birdman. A birdman. I don't know why it makes me laugh, but it's great. Other works in his oeuvre also gesture towards Umwelten that are not versions of himself. This is the case with the sculpture table and other bronzes of the 80s, and I think they were recently shown with Oliver and Arnie in Tribeca. This is an Umwelten of imagined hybrid species of humanoids and body parts. The figures began as a race of small mutant beings elaborately made up and costumed that covered Samaras' kitchen table. This became the ensemble sculpture table, cast in bronze, and 3 versions were completed in 1981. The figures are a species constituted of humanoids, plants, and animals. Some have feathered or furred wings, some have clawed feet, some second heads and torsos, some have female genitalia. There are also independent writhing heads, limbs, and intestines. Roberta Smith speculates that the figures represent the various selves within Samaras, selves in the process of emerging from the bodies that harbor them. Animal, magician, seducer, seduced, male, female, all at ease with polymorphousness. I'm going to breeze through a couple of my Umwelts. Of course, he does animal and insect boxes that are suggestive of Umwelts. So for me, this is a square watermelon begging for help inside of an aquarium, and some miniature organs sitting at a hell bar. And I've always wanted to be a dolphin boy. So this is my first bronze work. This was the Istanbul Biennial in 2019, and I made a shadow puppet theater. I wrote a play for a shadow puppet theater that was specifically designed for this field of square watermelons. It was a recent show in China. I had self-sustaining ecosystems and brine shrimp in glass capsules that actually were, I don't know, I think it's interesting. They were sealed, but they were producing their own oxygen. So it's kind of amazing that they really had no external air coming in. A popcorn trolley filled with popcorn-like snails, actually called the popcorn snail. It's genus Pomacea. This is, I don't even know if you're supposed to say personal favorite, but this is one of my personal favorites. And it's a reef of petrified and plastinated lingerie that existed solely for tropical marine invertebrates, mostly starfish and crustaceans. Spiny lobster on a glove, starfish, I don't know, a blouse, I don't know what that is, a brassiere. Let's skip that. We're pretty good. I think we can do 2 more. I'll do 2 more, and then I think we have a car at one. Anyway, thank you guys. Though, are you okay? Are you having an okay time? Okay. Operation 5 is called Crime Scenes, Seen and Obscene. Walter Benjamin wrote, "There is no document of culture that is not at the same time a document of barbarism." This statement functions in 2 ways in the context of this talk. It is, first, a mandate to expand the definition of criminality and violence. Just as base materialism doesn't have to be mud, dirt, shit, or spit, and can be a Barbie doll or a slice of pizza from Target, so can criminality wear a smile and arrive cloaked in old-fashioned charm. Second, it frames the interplay between seen and obscene that is operative in all the works presented. In classical Greek theater, episodes of violence had to take place obscene. That's where the word comes from, or off stage. Obscene came to mean that which was offensive, and as such had to be hidden. The word obscene also has roots in augural language, as acts of foreseeing the future. Obscene in this context referred to the presence of a bad omen, a portent of the yet to come. The 2 meanings suggest an oscillation between hiding and revealing, which is definitely apparent in all of our works. Societies are constituted by orders, material and ideological, that aspire to prevent leakage between barbarism and civilization. Civilized violence, such as war and capitalist exploitation, occupy the scene, while its criminal realities are quarantined in the obscene. For individuals, the socially acceptable persona occupies the scene, while the id hides in the obscene. And I know it seems like a diatribe, but it's going to factor especially into Meg Webster's Glenn. Samaras is a little bit more obvious. Samaras moves the obscene into the scene. Webster lets it haunt as a bad omen, and I democratize it with a dash of dark humor. With Samaras, the photo transformations, we'll skip this. This was the intermission. I was planning this as the intermission. Okay. With photo transformations and sittings, Samaras illustrates violence in its transformative role as applied to materials. The smearing, gouging, and stippling of the wet dye emulsions before the instant photos dried, to his body as subject and object, and in the sittings to the bodies of others where he performed as an auteur. Samaras began to experiment with photography in the late 60s, turning the camera on himself. In the photo transformations of the 70s, he began to explore the possibilities offered by the Polaroid camera for reworking the idea of the portrait. The result was a series of self-portraits and nudes, both the self-electrocutions with rays shooting out of his body and head, and the melting, deformed faces. The sittings extended the same technique to others, individual or small groups arranged on or near chairs situated in environments composed of light and additional props. There is a frank eroticism here, not that of the overt subjects of the transformations located in the scene, but as the directorial molestations of the voyeur auteur. When children are used as models, the works border on child pornography. Also, in this recent talk with Arnie, he said, the sittings are testaments to Samaras' intense voyeuristic impulse. In these staged environments, he implicates himself as some sort of boogeyman onlooker. My son, Mark, and David Zwerner appear in the photographs as children. Samaras said, I have done multiple strange, ungenerous, and cruel things, but so many years after Freud, all these ordinary sensations are still unnameable in polite cocktail party conversation. With the photo transformations and sittings, he moves the unnameable from the obscene into the scene, as iterations of the dialectic between hiding and revealing employed in these boxes. He also describes butchery as an amazing transformation process. A living animal becomes a strange combination of things and textures through the intervention of a sharp instrument. And in the photo transformations, I see the Polaroid camera functioning as the sharp instrument. Good examples, him murdering himself, violent traces. Traces actually goes to the end. Okay, Meg Webster's Glenn. Originally, Glenn was a site-specific work constructed in dialogue with the surrounding landscape at the Minneapolis Sculpture Center. It was installed indoors as an imported ecosystem in 2002. That's what you're looking at. Here in its artificially recreated springtime glory and sunlighted profusion of flowers and vines, lush with colors and scents. Glenn operates in the same dialectic between hiding and revealing as Samaras. Ernst Bloch, in his essay, A Philosophical View of the Detective Novel, wrote that the peculiarity of the detective genre is that the crucial dramatic action, the crime, always takes place before the story has begun. Crime stories are always about memories and traces as they take place in a forensically reconstructed world of violent events. So for me, this is a pretty apt description of Webster's Gardens, actually. The crime has taken place before the story has begun. Glenn is described by Webster as womb-like, its female symbology suggestive of nature's procreation, birth, and regeneration. In theory, visitors surrounded by lush plantings of flowers and grasses bathe in an amniotic atmosphere of sun, warm colors, and scents, and in this encounter become more conscious of nature and its destruction by humans. If criminal investigations are dependent on the analysis of traces, there are none to be found in Glenn. But they are there, hovering out of sight in the obscene is a presence whose power is attained precisely through its absence. The wastelands, the desecrated seas, the derelict exurbs, and these hauntings make Glenn more violent and traumatic than the overt violence expressed in Samaras' photo transformations and sittings. These are some of my crime-oriented neon vitrines that definitely have that interplay between hiding and revealing. This is the work that Jordan was speaking of in the beginning, a burn house next to a Samaras box at Mark Selwyn's gallery. This is a classic one for me called Mommy and Me. And it's a torched, a scorched environment and house. And the other side are these kind of vignettes of the id. And they're these kind of endless microcosms. A Slayer fan hanging himself. This is something I don't think I've ever shown this before, but here we go. This is I don't even know if this ever. I don't think this was ever shown, but I made effigies out of myself out of pet food, and I took one of the dog food ones to a wolf sanctuary. And the wolves were not. I don't think they loved it. But they were still playing with it. They're still nibbling, but they're not with gusto. Anyway, Dia's going to put the 3-hour video of this on their website. Again, the pet food effigy series, fish, these are fiberglass casts. One had fish food in it. One was in a body bag. This is fish food with maggots on it, or mealworms rather. And I think this is the last one we're going to have time for. But I think we did pretty good. There are 3 more. And then maybe we can have 1 or 2 questions, and then I think we got to hit the road. But I'm kind of doing this one for my best friend Caleb out there. So I'm glad I could get it in here. And I don't know what I'm going to do with this Blood of the Death story, but okay. So, Operation 6 is isarrhythmia made by hand. Like dermatomes or electroencephalograms, artworks evidence the rhythms of work, the transmission of electricities, pulsings, and nervous excitements from body to paper, fabric, and dirt. The rhythms are created by the interplay between hand, equipment, and material that has equal parts intention, muscle memory, and the autonomic operations of entrained nerve pathways. So I'm talking about the physiology and phenomenology of handwork, the manual labor involved in producing works whose textures reveal the rhythms involved in their making as insistent sensations of touch, giving rise to haptic, proprioceptive, kinesthetic aesthetics. In the works presented here, the generative rhythm is a shared isarrhythmia with all 3 artists, a rhythmic structure that is both repeated and varied, whose textures are the result of transformational operations that is manifest as buildup and accumulation. And I also, these are over a decade old now, and I never show these either. I guess this is kind of an opportunity to take these things and publicly interface them. But this is the drawing work. And you can see why someone would think there's a similarity with Samaras. But I also think, it has the same kind of perfectionism of Webster. And the thing about these is, they kind of look impossibly smooth, but I'll talk about them. So let's go back to drawings for one more second. So in the drawings, the isarrhythmia is the result of incessant accretions to the picture plane that are obsessive, methodical, and repetitive, equal parts intention and accident. And again, I think this rubric can be applied to all three of us. Equal parts intention and accident, autonomic muscle memory, and their mediation. As the structuring acts of architecture, there's an amplification of space through material splicing and recombinatory processes that produce a vibratory metabolism and evoke the flux of emergent entities and malformations. The evolution of the drawings occurs according to a logic of its own, often inscrutable, a doodler's or tinkerer's methodology that harbors the same precision as drafting or gene splicing. These works accumulate as palimpsest and pentimento archaeologies. Their texture appears mechanically smooth, but upon a closer inspection, it is discovered that they are three rather than two-dimensional, and that the texture is emphatically dentate. And this is what I was saying. The muddled tooth of the paper, the permanent staining of acid-free markers, the burnished stain of built-up enamel and ink result in hyperactive vistas and pubescent topographies that are rhizomatic, heterotopian scapes laden with biological iconography and invented patterns of nature. The way isarrhythmia emerges, again, I think with all three of us, there's an ongoing tension between compulsion and control. The obsessive will to control harbors the possibility of its becoming uncontrollable, leading to the ruin of the drawing in this case. But what I have learned to value is that the insistent impulse to give form to what as process is inherently unpredictable and in flux can open up new sets of possibilities. So I guess you could probably imagine we're going to look now at fabric reconstructions, Samaras. Yeah. Or Frankensteinian stitching. I don't know if necessarily quilted. But he says, because I know we're at the end there, these are his homemade geometries. He wanted to bring line closer to daily life. He also called them, this is my favorite thing, he called them frozen frictions. I think Webster's isarrhythmia is definitely seen with her patient groomings and clarification of primary materials. And the last two sections are kind of obvious, which are strategies and aesthetics of containment. And these can be purely visual. I'm actually not worried about that. But these are the obvious ones, so I saved them for last because I knew we would get to this point. Many of these are here. This is an early one, Cookie. And I experiment with all forms of containers and boxes. This is a house made of cereal. It's formaldehyde-soaked Fruit Loops, that are then sodden with marine epoxy, and it's populated by uranium spores, fruiting bodies. This is a miniature bar with TVs that were all showing that sitcom Cheers. Remember Cheers? That's what you're holding. Whatever that thing I was passing, that's an orange. And right now, this is kind of my principal mode of containment. But I've been copper electroplating like organic, live, and soft entities. And basically what happens is you put a thing in a bath of copper sulfate with electrodes attached to it, and you grow the copper on top of that thing. So essentially, I'm creating these mummifications or reliquaries. And the great thing about these is that they get lighter with time as the materials basically desiccate and denature within. So this is a whole series of bonsai-like assemblages. Recent show in China. Refrigerators as containers for butter sculptures. Trans habitats of fallen civilizations and organs. Borax encrusted microscopes. A cylinder, like a cyclone aquarium filled with shredded fortunes. This was shown in the Wild Strawberries show that Jordan mentioned. Meg's containers. Let me just tell, there was one Meg quote that was really amazing in my interview with her the other day, which is, and we have to wish her well because she's in rehab right now. So, she said, and she was talking about these two works in the show. She says, when it comes to things that are suggestive of containment, I am not thinking about how one separate thing holds another separate thing, but how the materials merge and intermingle, even on an invisible level. The copper and steel saltworks on view at DIA suggest primary materials in dialogue, not elements intended to levy control or remain independent from one another. And of course, the panoply of Samaras boxes, not all Byzantine. And we still got Nearest Virgin Forest playing. We'll save the last two for a rainy day, right? Because I think it's 3:15. Save the last two for a rainy day. But we got through 7 of them, and that's pretty good, and I really appreciate you being here, and if there's any criticisms or... I'll find a way to publish this, though. This, there's a lot here. Do we have any questions or comments? All right. Everyone's overloaded. Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you.